Been recording for about 30 years or so, and that obviously includes what's referred to as the analog era, analog tape, analog mixing consoles, analog outboard equipment. So that's where I started. But I've always regarded equipment and technology as tools, things to be used in the service of music. It's all sound is part of music, as far as I'm concerned. But music has always been the thing that's driven me, and just like any musician uses a piece of technology to create music in the first place, be it a piano or electric guitar or a synthesizer, that's what a record producer or a recording engineer, that's the sort of relationship you have with equipment. It's stuff you use, and the end being to create a great recording of a performance of a piece of music. So it doesn't make any sense not to embrace that, really. I mean, and to embrace all the developments that come along year after year, including, of course, digital technology, which is now mushroomed completely. I was going to say out of control, but it's not out of control. But there's some great new stuff happening that would never have happened in the analog day. And yeah, digital audio workstations have provided the plug-in framework that enables individual designers to come up with ideas to enhance those workstations ad infinitum. I mean, there are hundreds of plugins, thousands of plugins around now, as we know. A lot of which are really interesting and could never have been even thought about in the analog days. You could never, lots of plugins you couldn't now create in an analog format. You couldn't go backwards. We've seen digital emulations of analog gear, but there aren't any emulations of digital plugins. I mean, there's so many that it's just not possible to do in the analog world. It's kind of half and half. It's a hybrid. I mean, I do bus out some. Because I still use analog gear, and so I need to have multiple outputs in order to be able to put an analog multi-band compressor on a vocal, for example. So I need about 16 channels of I/O. So some of that will be used as individual outs, which are then summed in the analog domain. I still use the classic SSL bus compressor on the mix, because I like it, and I've got one, so I'll just carry on using it. I mean, I have experimented with alternatives, but I've always come back to the SSL bus compressor for that. So yeah, it's a hybrid. Yeah, whatever sounds good. Yes, I mean, I've always liked that idea. It's something that from a I was going to say a discipline point of view, but from a practical point of view, with analog tape, you need to adopt that attitude, because there are limits to what you can do in post-production in the analog world. Because the more EQ and compression you use, the more distortion and noise you can bring up, so that you have to be careful what you do. And so that encourages you to create sounds as they're being performed. And I still do that. And it's not out of habit. I think that's better for the production. It's better for the performance. It's better for a performer who's playing a guitar solo to hear the sound they're going to be playing with. And it makes a difference because it's interactive. So, and it's good to make this. There are so many decisions you have to make during the whole recording process, production process, that it's good to make as many as you can early on, because then you're not faced with these incredible number of decisions during the mix. So, yeah, I mean, why not decide what that guitar solo is going to sound like when it's recorded? Then when you come to mix it, you don't have to do it all again. It's just there. Well, the first one I used was Drum Leveler, which is what got me excited about the company, because that's an example of something that couldn't be done in the analog domain. I mean, that's the idea that you can even out the different volumes of snare and kick drum hits or tom hits or whatever instrument it is painlessly. I mean, hitherto you'd use a compressor to achieve that, and that's not to say I wouldn't continue to use compressors, because compressors are good sound shaping devices as well. So I still do that. But when you've got tremendous variations in drum levels, that I mean, dynamics are good, and that's fine. I'm not trying to knock dynamics, but sometimes you want consistency, and if you need consistency, then it's great to get that instantly. And to have that displayed on the screen in the graphical timeline they give you is really good. But the other aspects of it are what you can do with what happens between the beats. So it's the best noise gate I've come across. I remember when the first Keypex came out in the early 70s, and that was fantastic. You can get rid of the hi-hat from the snare track, but it's not perfect. You always lost a bit of the initial transient, even if you use. I mean, I in Pro Tools as well as working on analog tape. I always felt I had to set up a kind of a pre-trigger in order to make sure the gate opened in time, and then you've got decay issues depending on how the snare was hit in the first place. That's instantly available in Drum Leveler. You can get rid of anything that happens between the snare beats really easily. But as well as that, you can take that information like spillage from the hi-hat or grace notes, more importantly, and you can process them separately because it's got this second threshold which allows you to process and compress or whatever you want to do with the low-level information. And that's something I would always have to set up separate channels for and get into elaborate phase changing to get rid of the snare from the spillage track. So I had a track which only had the grace notes on, and then there are always little bits leaking through, and I mean, it's instant with Drum Leveler, so that's fantastic. As it says, it's automatic. You just set up a master track and slave tracks, and the slave tracks are automatically aligned to the master track, and it gets rid of phase issues and tightens up drum kits really, really easily and quickly. I mean, this is the thing about processing. You don't want to have to spend a lot of time messing around with this stuff. It's very instant, and it's very variable too. You can choose how you want to use it depending on how the kit's recorded and how you want it to sound, etc. But I think all of these plugins illustrate quite an original train of thought when it comes to the design. I mean, these are things that the way these three plugins, the three I've used, operate illustrates a different viewpoint when it comes to designing processing. You know, they're not. There are lots of emulations of analog gear. You know, that's fine. That's great. But these are they illustrate a completely different mindset. It seems to me, a very original way of thinking about how to deal with sound, and that's very interesting. So it's going to be interesting to see what they come up with in the future. Not getting in the way of creativity, and certainly not getting in the way of performance, which means that you've got to be very fast in doing what you do when it comes to recording. I mean, mixing is something else. You can take your time on mixing, but when you're working with creative musicians and singers, you've got to be there and not get in the way, because there are a lot of people who give their best performances very early on. So quite often you won't have time, or you think you won't have time, to set up a microphone, a mic pre, EQ and compression, whatever you need to record. You won't have time to do that by the time the creative moment's gone. A lot of people work on first and second takes. So how do you get a level? You know, and experience tells you in the end. I mean, if you have any sense of what a singer's dynamic range is like and what the volume is like, you can kind of guess to a certain extent where to set the mic pre. You've got to be prepared to do it on that basis, to be able to record without actually hearing anything beforehand. But I mean, experience will teach you as much of that as you can get. But that's, yeah, certainly one of the things is, don't get in the way, and capture the moment as much as you can. Well, I'd reach for them because they're original. Nobody else is doing this. This is new stuff as far as I'm concerned. But yes, I mean, I can imagine that I'm going to be using Drum Leveler certainly on any live kit. I mean, it's a matter of control. You always need control over what's happening. So certainly, and probably Auto Align, I'd probably go for that straight away. I mean, with a lot of plugins, you think, okay, I'm going to try this plugin, put it on. Sometimes you don't use it because it doesn't actually have a sufficiently beneficial effect. But I think these are the sort of plugins that I would certainly reach for initially as being the first attempt at solving a problem or improving a sound.
We're here in your studio, which is full of gadgets. How important is
gadgets?
Gadgets, okay. Let's try again.
Professional equipment, if you don't mind.
And then technology came along. What? I've been up since 4 o'clock. Good job it's you and no other fuck. Let's start again. I think we have a take, Mick.
Oh.
Yeah, we're done.
Got enough?
I think so.
Well, that's pretty good.